every day, but the latest morning consult survey shows President Biden holding a 2-point advantage over Donald Trump, 44 to 42 among registered voters nationwide. That's within the poll's margin in error. What's interesting, though, is it's a pretty big shift from a January survey, which found Trump leading Biden 45% to 40%. The swing toward Biden is partly due to an increase in support among independents. In January, independents backed Trump by 10 points, 38% to 28%. In the latest poll, Biden and Trump are tied with 34% each. What do you think, Joe?
Well, you know, we always say it's about trend lines. This is one of many polls, but we're saying that more often lately. Oh, this is just one of many polls, one of many polls. What we saw last week was a poll that showed Biden making great strides and doing it on the strength of younger voters coming home. What we're seeing now is Biden making really good strides on the strength of independents coming home. And I saw Dan Pfeiffer, I think it was Dan Pfeiffer, saying the important thing about the State of the Union address wasn't that it was going to give Biden a quick bump. It's that it proved the Republican lie that he was some doddering old man, some doddering idiot. Just proved that to be a complete lie, that this is a guy that actually gave better than he got. And it's actually House Republicans and Donald Trump that are looking like, you know,
and it's interesting because
idiots.
That's what the Biden campaign wants the public to believe and wants us to believe, which is the more they see of Joe Biden, and in contrast, the more they see of Donald Trump, the more independents in particular are going to like Joe Biden. So they saw the State of the Union. You've seen a bump since then for the president. They said, okay, he looked solid that night. He's up to this job. And now they're seeing more and more of Donald Trump. They're seeing the repulsive stuff he's putting on social media. They're watching how he behaves outside the courtroom. And people who may have tried to tune politics out and who could blame them for the last couple of years are starting to tune back in and go, ugh, I don't think I want to do this show again. I don't want to see this movie again. So we'll see if those trend lines continue, but certainly in the last couple of weeks in the favor of President Biden.
Well, and Gene, two things going on also right now is you have Trump getting more important by the day. You know, all these people, oh, they're just tweets. Oh, they're not just tweets. No, this is an out-and-out call for authoritarianism. This isn't just tweets. This is calling for the assassination of political opponents. So you have that on one side. And you know, especially these Wall Street guys, you know, oh, I will never vote for Donald Trump ever. And then, you know, 3 days later, yeah, I'm kind of leaning toward it, which is just, it's obscene. It's absolutely obscene. And this BS, oh, Joe Biden's a socialist. They love to say that. Joe Biden's a, oh, really? Yeah, is that why you get richer by the second? Is that why you have more money than you know? You know, their problem tax season is, it really is. If they're investing in the stock market, it's not that he's a socialist and they've got to figure out how to hide money. It's that they're making too much money. And they got to figure out how to hide all the record profits they've made this year. Stock market at an all-time high. So that's on one side, right? This desperation to justify supporting a fascist because you think it may be good for your bottom line. And then on the other side, you have the fact that Joe Biden is doing something, Gene, that nobody has done to Donald Trump in all of his years in politics. He's taken it to him every day. He's mocking and ridiculing him. Donald Trump can't even put up anymore that he cheated to win his club championship anymore without Biden making a fool of him. Everywhere he moves, Biden and his campaign are just tweaking him, mocking him. And suddenly this bully isn't looking so tough.
Absolutely. Don't underestimate the mocking. This is really, you know, a lot of people sort of question that at first. Is this really the right line for the Biden campaign to take? I think we can now say, yes, it is. It's a very promising line for the Biden campaign to take, and it drives Donald Trump crazy. And that's not much of a drive, actually. I mean, he's already there, but he's going to get increasingly frantic, increasingly cornered by all these court cases, by all the money he has to put up, and this is a bad period in this campaign for Donald Trump, and I think there's every reason to expect that it's going to get worse. As you said, watch the trend lines. The trend lines are clearly in Biden's favor right now. I know we're going to talk about Florida later, but what happened in Florida yesterday, potentially puts that red state back into play, a state without which Republicans cannot win. Donald Trump cannot conceivably win. At the very least, he's going to have to put a whole lot of time and money in trying to defend Florida. It's not the sort of rosy political picture that they like to paint down at Mar-a-Lago anymore. In fact, it's not looking so good for the former president.
So I was speaking yesterday to a senior Biden campaign official who said, first of all, in the State of the Union, that target message was nervous Democrats. That's the audience they needed to reach. The likes of David Axelrod, who a few months ago said Joe Biden should step aside, is now saying he's our guy. And not just to pick on Axelrod, there's a lot of Democrats who are feeling that, Molly. They've now feeling much better about their candidate's chances that he's up to the job. And we're seeing that movement here after a campaign blitz through 8 battleground states. The other thing this official said to me yesterday is their theory of the case has long been, we've talked about it on the show, the more Americans hear Donald Trump, the more they'll be repulsed by him, and independents and swing voters will say, we can't do that again. Well, the issue is Trump's largely been off stage the last month, and these numbers have already started to move. That changes tonight. Donald Trump is going to be in Wisconsin delivering his first rally in front of a crowd of people in a month. If that Easter Truth Social post was any preview, we're going to be in for some unhinged comments. And then we know how he reacts to pressure. Political pressure, starting to trail in the polls. Legal pressure. He's got to be in a court in 2 weeks. This could go south pretty quick for him.
Yeah, I mean, look, the visual of him sitting in a New York City courtroom for weeks and weeks with people like his former fixer, Michael Cohen, Stormy Daniels, and maybe Hope Hicks, right? We don't know who's testifying where. I think that's going to be really a rough visual for voters. And look, we've never had an election where one candidate is sitting in a courtroom like this for weeks and weeks. So I actually think it's really going to be a heavy lift. And just because all of this has helped him with the base, he needs to expand the electorate in order to win, right? He's never worked on expanding the electorate. And I think that this is going to be, I think this is a bad look for swing voters.
And has no interest in expanding the electorate, Eddie. He won't even go after Nikki Haley's voters, who are Republicans, who he needs to bring back into the fold. He says, no, and Joe Biden's taking the campaign, taking advantage of that with aides courting Nikki Haley's voters. But what's interesting, to Molly's point inside that poll, the top line number is interesting, but the independent swing of 10 points in just a couple of months, that's where the action is in the general election.
Right. We need to brace ourselves for an unhinged Trump, I think. Jonathan is right. But he's in Michigan and he's in Wisconsin for a reason. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So I understand the consult poll is a snapshot, but I want to understand what the swing has been in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, because we know that's what matters, right? And so it's great to see Joe Biden out there, as Joe, you described, what's happening coming out of the State of the Union. But what matters, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania.
I miss those 3 states. Now, you're right. If he wins those, that's it. And I'm curious, Jonathan, how are they feeling in those states right now?
Certainly better. There's still worries about Michigan. We know that the Gaza conflict really weighs heavily there. Some Biden aides have said to me that they think that some of those Muslim voters, Arab American voters, young voters, they're gone. They're not going to come back to him. They're not going to go to Donald Trump, but they're going to stay home and find a third-party candidate. But they feel like they can stitch together a coalition there to still win. Wisconsin is actually usually the closest of these 3 states. Yeah. That's the one they feel best about right now. It's been trending that way. There was obviously there have been some abortion decisions there of late that they feel like is breaking their favor. They like the Senate race there too.
Strangely enough, older white dudes have held for Biden.
Yeah.
I say it's really strange because we have all these sort of simplifications of how voters go, but there are older white men are doing much better for Biden, and I suspect it's because, I guess the older you are, the more conservative you are, which usually turns you against Democrats and toward Republicans. But here, conservative with a small c looks at a guy that's trying to destroy their life that they've known for 60, 65 years. They want no part of it.
And also, the president has done things for seniors, for capping prescription drug costs and the like. And then Pennsylvania, of course, is the state where President Biden has spent the most time in. It's in his backyard. They know Trump's strength in rural areas. That's going to decide. Well, one could argue the whole election is going to come down to whether they can turn out voters in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, young voters, black voters. That might be the whole thing. But right now, they feel okay.
But having Democratic governors in those 3 states really does help.
And good Senate candidates in all 3.
Yeah. Hey, Mika, a lot going on in Israel, a lot going on across the region, none of it particularly good.
No, and we've got the major news out of Florida and significant legal developments in Trump's trials. But first, as you said, let's go to Israel. The World Central Kitchen Aid Organization says 7 of its workers were killed yesterday in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. In a statement, the charity says a convoy carrying workers was struck, leaving a warehouse where aid was being dropped off. Among those killed was an American who possessed dual citizenship with Canada. The organization says it is immediately pausing its operations in the region. The IDF said it was conducting a thorough review of the tragic incident. Meanwhile, the Associated Press reports Iranian officials claim 2 generals and 5 officers were killed in an airstrike in Syria yesterday. The Times of Israel reports one of those kills was an Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps senior-most official in Syria. 4 unnamed Israeli officials confirmed Israel launched the strike, according to the New York Times. Israel has not officially commented. All of this happened the same day Israel and the U.S. met for virtual talks to discuss alternatives to a ground invasion of Rafah. Let's bring in columnist and associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius. David, break down what's going on here. And obviously, at the same time of all of this, we're supplying military aid to Israel. Is this becoming more complicated for the Biden administration?
So, Mika, let me just say a word about the tragic deaths of the World Central Kitchen volunteers. 2 weeks ago, I was with Chef Jose Andres, who runs this wonderful charitable organization, and he was passionate, occasionally to the point of tears, in speaking about the humanitarian need of the people that his workers were going to serve in Gaza. And it's just a tragedy to see these people trying their best to keep Palestinians who are suffering under this now almost 6-month war alive. So just want to note that, and our hearts go out to the people who are trying to help. The shadow war between Israel and Iran exploded yesterday in Damascus, in a building apparently next to the Iranian embassy. Who was killed there? The apparent principal target, Mohammad Reza Zahedi, ran Iranian proxy operations for the Quds Force of the IRGC in Syria and Lebanon, which means he was directing so many aspects of this war, undeclared war against Israel. It's said that he was meeting with Palestinians to plan next stages in Gaza. So it was a particularly important meeting. The Iranians must be wondering how on earth did the Israelis have the intelligence to target that place at that moment and take out not just Zahedi, but 6 of his key deputies. This is an example to me of what Israel does with sometimes chilling brilliance, this precision, targeted killing. It's a sign, I think, of Israelis turning to something that they can do, as difficult as it is, at a moment when the Gaza war itself remains so difficult. Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, may be underground, but Zahedi, the Quds Force chief in the region, he's not underground. He's in a building that you can strike, and they did. This has all the earmarks of being something personally approved by Prime Minister Netanyahu. These kinds of targeted strikes are not taken without a prime minister's direct approval. So I think we need to see this as something that Netanyahu, in a very frustrating moment in the war, decided to do. And then just a final point. This shows Israeli force of arms at their toughest and, in some ways, most effective. The most expert journalist on this subject, Ronan Bergman from the New York Times, wrote a superb book called Rise and Kill First about this program of targeted assassinations. And he says that there are really thousands of these operations over 30-plus years have been almost always tactical successes. But you have to be honest that in terms of overall strategy, they haven't really brought Israel closer to the kind of settlement of these problems that it seeks.
In the United States government, the Biden White House reached out directly to the Iranian government, said it did not know about this strike and had nothing to do with it. This was an Israeli operation. David, I want to go back to what happened on the ground in Gaza with the World Kitchen group that was killed. Apparently 7 people killed in that Israeli strike that Israel has not taken, it's not claimed the strike yet. That wonderful group that rushes in for the last decade or so into places like Ukraine and Haiti and wherever else they're needed to feed people. In a time when public perception of the Israeli mission there has turned, obviously the sympathies of the world are still with the Israeli people over what happened on October 7th, but the public perception, the White House pressure campaign on Benjamin Netanyahu has stepped up. This obviously makes things much more difficult, does it not, for the White House as it tries to stand with an ally in Israel?
I think it does. These killings need to be investigated. How did it happen that humanitarian relief workers ended up getting killed? And I hope that there's a sincere, deep IDF investigation, that they have that obligation. Knowing Chef Jose Andres, he'll continue with these missions if it is in any way possible. It's rare to find somebody in our world who's as dedicated to doing good as he is. I was in Ukraine last week, rolling down the highway, and I saw a big convoy of World Central Kitchen trucks rushing toward the front lines where hungry people are suffering. So he's everywhere. But we'll have to see exactly how this happened. It matters to find out the details here.
All right, we're going to move to Ukraine, and House Speaker Mike Johnson reportedly coming around to the idea of Ukraine aid, so long as he can get a political win out of it. The New York Times reports Johnson is allegedly hinging his support on a measure that would force President Biden to reverse a pause on new permits for liquefied natural gas export facilities. Should that happen, it would give the speaker a personal win, unblocking a proposed export facility in his home state of Louisiana. Johnson has also discussed financing some of the aid by selling off Russian sovereign assets that have been frozen and turning the money into loans the Ukrainians would have to pay back. The speaker has not publicly pledged his support for any option, but he has stated the House will address Ukraine once it returns to Washington next week. Let's bring NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale. Ali, what more do we know about this? There's a little Trumpy sound to that, making Ukraine pay back.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the ideas, though, that's percolating, Mika, in large part because we've seen the idea of just giving continued direct aid to Ukraine fall flat, especially among key people within Johnson's House Republican conference. Now, if it wasn't Ukraine, it would be the appropriations package that has him in trouble. If it wasn't the appropriations package, it would be the border. You can really pick any issue. And the realities of a very slim margin that seems to always be getting slimmer in the House GOP becomes evident when you speak about the way that Mike Johnson is going to navigate this next stretch going forward. Now, the House has been on recess for the last week. They don't come back until next week. This is him trying to get his ducks in a row here. But it's now the second time that we've heard this idea of frozen Russian assets being a way to possibly give aid to Ukraine, even if it's just on a loan basis. This is not just something that House Republicans are talking about amongst themselves either. When President Zelensky last week spoke with Johnson, he referenced this idea in his tweet, sort of giving a readout of what they talked about. So this is something that could be gaining traction, but I think it's also important to note the way that he's pairing it with the potential to do more on liquefied natural gas. Of course, that's something that helps him at home, as you mentioned, as well as abroad. But then also the idea that they're also going to try to contend with the border, which has been such a thorny issue the entire time that he's been Speaker, which, again, has not been the entirety of this Congress. We all remember what happened at the end of last year that landed Mike Johnson in this very tough position to begin with.
Yeah, Gene Robinson, though, it looks as if the Speaker understands he really needs to get the yes. I'm sure he's hearing from the chairwomen that run the most important foreign policy committees saying, you know, you either get there or we'll find a way to get there, if it's whether it's a petition or, but it looks like we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, it looks like things are moving in that direction, but boy, are they moving slowly. You know, the House doesn't even get back until next week. And so, meanwhile, the days pass, the clock ticks. And a question for David Ignatius. David, you were just in Ukraine. You interviewed President Zelensky. What is the situation on the ground there now? How long can Ukraine hold out, and how are the Ukrainians doing?
So, Gene, he was very specific about what the delay of nearly 6 months in approving this package has meant for Ukraine. They can't get started in building new brigades that they need for offense coming later this year or next year. He said that unless the aid comes, he's going to have to shrink his lines, meaning retreat, if he's only got 2,000 of the 8,000 artillery shells he needs. He said the only way to handle that is to have a smaller front line that he has to defend. So he's talking about having to move west as the Russians advance. A lot of really frightening possibilities. I think Ukraine will be enormously relieved if this package does go through. I'm told that Ukrainian soldiers in their trenches look at their phones to see what the latest news is from the U.S. Congress, if you can imagine that. So this will be a morale booster for the people who are fighting so hard in that country. Just a final thing. While the Ukrainians have been waiting for the United States to provide this aid, they haven't just sat around. They've been developing their own weapons, and they're now sending those weapons into Russia. But there was a strike just over the last 24 hours, 1,300 kilometers from Ukraine to a Russian target. So they've got drones of their own, not our drones, that can hit targets that far away. Those refineries that you've seen ablaze, those have been hit by Ukrainian drones. So they're not waiting. They need those weapons. But they're determined not to give up.
All right, the Washington Post's David Ignatius, thank you so much for your insights this morning. We have a lot more to get to on Morning Joe. Florida's Supreme Court upholds the state's strict abortion ban, but will allow voters to have the final say in November. We're going to go over the key rulings and what they could mean down the road, and explain how the issue factors into confidence that Florida is winnable for the Biden campaign this fall. Plus, we'll break down the major legal developments surrounding both Donald Trump's civil fraud and this morning, including the expanded gag order in Donald Trump's. Is somebody, Jonathan, just have a seat, sweetie.
Hold on a second. Hold on.
Hold on. Put my lipstick on.
Somebody is passing notes. Somebody is passing notes.
Just getting set for the show.
going on?
I had to move from over there to over here. I had to put some stuff.
Yeah, right behind Willie. Okay.
Mr. Lemire.
All right.
Wow.
Apologies to all.
Just have a seat,
Mr.
Jonathan.
Lemire, are you ready?
Ready for the show.
For us to begin the class?
Yeah, let's do it.
I know it's your first day.
Cue it all up, DJ. Let's
her
get the
name is
music and
Mika.
everything. Hold on 1 second. Look at you. Look, my phone.
Everybody's in their seats,
right.
and we'll get to
That's
all
right.
that's going on this morning. Hi, Willie. The expanded
Mika.
gag order in Donald Trump's hush money case comes as the former president came up with the cash needed to appeal for his civil fraud judgment. We'll talk about that. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, Truth Social looks more like a meme stock, with shares of the company plunging yesterday, significantly
Listen, I'm not really
lowering
good on Wall
Trump's
Street
net worth.
stuff, Willie, but
I
who
never
saw
understood
that coming?
this. All right.
Really, who saw that
We'll
coming? That a
explain
company
all of
that
this.
has been losing money from the very beginning. Who would have ever guessed it
Okay.
would have dropped?
You mean a company that
Don't really
loses
get
money
that
probably
thing.
actually isn't worth $8 billion? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Wall Street Whiz is over here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, also
I'm
we're
still
gonna
waiting
get-
for that call from Wall Street for you and me.
Yeah, what's going on? We've dropped the hint for like 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Where
don't
do you
think-
want to go?
They must not be impressed by what
Look
they
at
see.
J.P. Morgan, or you want to go
I
to?
feel like I'm a Goldman guy.
Goldman
if I'm being
guy?
honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the culture.
Well, maybe they're going to dissect what we just said there and say we need those two guys, right?
There we go.
Good times and
Okay.
bad.
Now back to
Can
a
you believe
two-shot.
Alabama won?
I guess TJ's directing again.
Can you believe
Two-shot.
Alabama won this
Okay.
week?
I was very happy for you when Alabama won. Roll Tide. They got a tough task, as
That's
my
why Joe
Illini
looks the
showed
way
in
he
that
does.
game.
Oh, that's a rough one.
Whoa.
30-0 run.
Yeah, we were tied at
Yeah.
23. My parents went to Illinois, so I'm a fan.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was 53-23, a
That
30-0 run.
Yeah.
UConn men's team is one of the best, honestly, we've seen. I can't remember since when, in a long, long time. So balanced and so good. Tough task for Alabama, but we'll see. Maybe they'll pull off
They're in
the
the Final
upset.
Four for the first time ever.
I know.
Good,
I know.
good. Okay, right here. Back to me now. One shot. Plus, we'll talk about
One
the
shot.
key abortion rulings. Yeah, just do the one. Goodbye.
Okay.
Abortion rulings yesterday from Florida Supreme Court. This is a major story. Could the appearance of a measure on the November ballot put the state in play for Democrats? A lot to talk about there, including just explaining what happened yesterday. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have the host of Way Too Early. He's made himself known.
Oh, Jonathan's
White House
here.
Bureau Chief at
Chained to my seat.
Politico, Jonathan Lemire, professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr., and special correspondent at Vanity Fair and the host of the Fast Politics podcast, Molly Jong Fast. She is an MSNBC political analyst and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of the Washington Post. The great Eugene Robinson is with us. So let's begin with the latest. This is kind of interesting. We don't do these 31 past the hour. The Florida Supreme Court has issued two landmark rulings on abortion access in the state. In a pair of conflicting decisions yesterday, the court both upheld the state's strict abortion ban and said it would allow a proposed amendment to enshrine abortion access to appear on the November ballot. The court's ruling was for a Planned Parenthood lawsuit against a 15-week abortion ban signed into law in 2022. But in allowing that ban to take effect, the conservative-leaning court has also made way for the more strict 6-week abortion ban that Governor DeSantis signed in 2023 to move forward. The court's decision on the 15-week ban yesterday means that 6-week ban on abortion will take effect in 30 days. Also yesterday, in a narrow 4-3 ruling, the court agreed to allow Floridians to vote on enshrining abortion access. Under Florida law, the Supreme Court must approve the language of any citizen-led constitutional amendment before it can move forward. Opponents of the ballot measure criticized the proposed wording of the ballot question, saying it was unclear. At least 60% of voters will have to back the move for it to ultimately pass. Kind of a mixed bag yesterday, Joe, but in a way, not a way that I would choose, but Florida is being set up for a very important vote in November, and they will have some pretty searing examples along the way as to why perhaps a ban on abortion is a problem.
Well, in the short run, bad news, obviously, for women's
Right.
health, for women's reproductive
Right.
rights, for women's choice. In the long run, Molly, and you brought it up during the break, both items by the Supreme Court were bad news for Donald Trump yesterday because first thing the court did was stick Trump with Ron DeSantis' 6-week abortion ban. Will be extraordinarily unpopular. And then the second thing is making the election in 24 a referendum on
Yeah.
a 6-week abortion ban. That's just bad for Donald Trump and Republican candidates up and down the ballot. Does that mean that Biden's going to win Florida? You know, it's still a long shot, but I'll tell you what, if I'm a Florida Republican, I hate this being on the ballot.
Right. I mean, they worked hard to keep this off the ballot, and the Democratic state party there worked really hard to get it on the ballot. Almost a million signatures, and it went through the court a bunch of times. I mean, I think what's interesting is it tends to be when abortion is on the ballot, or it tends to be when abortion is on the ballot, it wins. People,
Right.
even in red states like Ohio. What I think is super interesting about Florida is that we see how much this Republican Party has moved, even on abortion. Remember, they started with these 6-week heartbeat bills, right? And now they really have moved on to like embryonic personhood, right? So in states like Alabama, they're going after IVF. So we can really even see the progression of if you give these people a little bit, they are not satisfied. They are not satiated. So I do actually think that this is really something that Democrats can run on.
And let's not forget, it was about a year ago that Governor DeSantis signed this ban in the cover of night.
Yeah.
Remember that? There was no big splashy press conference. It was late at night, and they tried to turn away from it. But now here we are. Ali Vitale, you've been covering this case very closely. So just as a practical question, how does this work now? So the 15-week ban is upheld, but as Mika just pointed out, a month from right now, a month from today perhaps, that could become a 6-week ban.
Exactly. And I think for people who have been watching where reproductive access is on the map, this is a real whiplash moment, because Florida used to be one of those states that was considered a safer place to go for abortion care. And now we are watching, in the span of just a few weeks, it going from a state that used to be a safer state to now being at a 6-week ban. I mean, it is really stunning and a reminder of the way that things can move so quickly. But I think that I always thought, based on what I was hearing from advocates on the ground in Florida and my sources there, they thought they were going to be pushed to the precipice on this. They thought that they would be operating on a landscape where they are both trying to enshrine abortion protections in that ballot amendment. That would put it at around 24 weeks. But then they also thought they would be doing it against the backdrop of one of the most restrictive bans in the country, which is to say they thought they'd be operating with Florida at a 6-week ban. So as much as this might have been a setback in the short term, I think most of the folks who are working on this from an advocacy perspective and a political perspective on the ground thought that this is where they were going to end up. And I'll pick up on something that Molly said, because I was in Ohio, and I feel like we've talked about this so many times on the show before, but last August in Ohio, millions of people should not have turned out on a random Tuesday in the summer for an election on a ballot referendum that didn't actually have the word abortion in it, but everyone knew was very much about abortion access and reproductive health care. And so I think that when you watch what's happened in Ohio, when you watch what's happened in Kentucky, Florida could be the next place to join a long line of political winners on the abortion access side of things. It's why you see House Democrats led by Hakeem Jeffries going down to Florida today. It's why in my conversations around the Florida Senate contest, we're hearing Democrats sound a little bit more optimistic than they tend to sound. I mean, I remember when I first started coming on this show back in 2018, I was covering
how it works is you got a 98% offset, okay? There's big gaps here is when you're selling a whole bunch of electricity back to the utility company.